Thanks for clicking, and today we're going to be talking about a Necron army that's been doing pretty well locally. I'm excited to talk about it with you. So who am I? Well, I'm Walter Langendorf. I've been playing Necron since basically forever. I'm pretty good at 40k, go about 50-50 in the pro tabletop meta, which has some real killers in it. I was absolutely elated to see us get a newest codex, and I've been scheming nonstop since then. It finally arrived at what I consider to be the best version of my basic concept, which is a close-range, way-to-fire Necron shooting list. So here's the list. I've stuck with a single battalion setup, and, unsurprisingly, for a close-range shooting list, nothing can beat Mephrit. I'm aware of the other archetypes of Necrons, which go with a Novak dynasty for close combat, or a custom dynasty for object shenanigans respectively, but my Crons have always relied on shooting, and I wasn't about to quit now. For our HQ, we have the guy you'd expect, which I feel like I share with about 99% of Necron lists. The Catacomb Command Barge with a Voltaic Staff. He shoots, he fights, he has a good buff. He's almost certainly the best HQ choice in the decks. Backing him up, I've got a Royal Warden to keep us out of close combat, and a Technomancer to carry the Veil. For troops, I've again been traditional, with a big unit of warriors to do work and two small units of immortals to do actions. This is a big role reversal from my 8th edition days when I used to shun warriors in favor of endless immortals, Tesla immortals at that. Next up, in elites, we've got a Reanimator, which is a recent addition that's working out pretty well, and the Nightbringer, who is obviously the linchpin model of the list. The Nightbringer is how we get away with being so aggressive in close range while being totally unable to fight. He keeps the enemy units honest, you know? Our fast attack choices are identical Tombblade squads, which are pound for pound exceeded only by Reaper warriors in terms of their sheer brutality. These are the core of the list, and your play with them will almost certainly determine whether you win or lose. I picked Annihilation Barges for heavy support. I've always been a fan. They're just slightly above average nowadays, just a little too durable and a little too hard hitting for their point cost. They do work as well, but they're decidedly less important to the list than the Tombblades and the Reaper warriors. Now, before I go unit by unit, I thought I'd spend a sec talking about my 3 most common strats. These are fairly universal across the army and are always important to keep in mind. First off, Solar Pulse is just fantastic. 1 CP to strip cover from an enemy unit from anyone who wants to shoot at it. Think long and hard before you ever let your enemy get any cover benefits, because between this ability and the Vengeful Stars protocol, it's very often worth it to deny them. Talent for Annihilation is similarly sprinkled on top of everything. It's just your basic turning command points into mortal wounds, but it's a lot more efficient than paying for a D3 since you'll almost always get 3. One thing we do a lot of in this list is making wound rolls against enemies, so use this to do a few extra mortal wounds. And lastly, of course, the good old command reroll, which tends to be omitted in these kind of lists, but really shouldn't be. It's not sexy, but very often the most important CP you'll spend in the game is the one that makes sure the Nightbringer succeeds at his charge. It's game changing, and similarly, advancing onto objectives can have a 5 or a 10 point swing in terms of point value overall, and that's more important than almost any other strat that you might do. Now we get into the unit list. Let's go one by one. First off, we have our Warlord, and what a beast he is. I think everybody who ever cracked the Codex saw this guy. He shoots as hard as his weight in Locust Destroyers, and he fights about as well as he would with a War Scythe. Beyond that, he even buffs core units in 2 distinct ways, both of which our Tombblades positively love. I gave him Enduring Will to make him even more durable, but he really doesn't need it. He weighs in at a stalwart 9 wounds with tough 6 and the fantastic quantum shields that make the barges so annoying to shift. He hits well above his weight class, and he's an absolute steal for the points cost. I'd go so far as to guess the majority of Necron competitive lists have the same freaking HQ. Look, somebody's got to carry the Veil. okay, that was a little mean, but the Technomancer heals core units, which is what our list cares about, and he repairs vehicles, which we also use. He does his job, but you better believe I'm always tempted to put the Veil on the Royal Warden and just get more units. This guy's on thin ice. Speaking of the Royal Warden, we got the new kid on the block. He solves one problem, which isn't a huge amount of utility for someone as expensive as he is, but it's honestly a problem that we need solved, so you don't really have a lot of choice. He shoots profoundly hard with his relic. It isn't uncommon for him to pop a trio of Primaris Marines from about 20 inches away, which always sort of sets the other player back on their heels. The relic's extra range is more important than the extra strength because it's so long that you end up getting rapid fire, and otherwise you'd only shoot twice. The Relentless March buff and being a node for protocols are also very nice, but this guy's really here for adaptive strategy. You want those Tombblades shooting, and he helps make sure that happens. These guys make me so mad. I loved Immortals, man. I had so many squads of 10-man Tesla Immortals, and look what they did to my beautiful boys. 17 points per wound, and their name is Immortal. 19 with Tesla. It's a complete desecration. Anyway, they still have a place in my list, but it's no longer the place of honor. Nowadays, they're action monkeys. They crouch behind ruins, they go around and do actions on objective. They plant banners, they do scanners, all that nonsense. It's a damn shame. Warriors, by contrast, got like the romance movie makeover where they let down their hair and take off their glasses and pick up a new Gauss Reaper, and suddenly we can all see they're played by a Hollywood actress. That metaphor kind of got away from me. Anyway, Warriors are back in a big way. They shoot for point harder than anything else in the Codex, and maybe harder than anything else unsupported anywhere. 2 strength 5, AP minus 2 shots out of a 13 points model is berserk. The reason I only have one unit of these guys is that I'm only allowed to take one Veil. Without a Veil, they can have mobility range issues in a real way, but Veiled Warriors are positively ferocious. They deal out hellacious firepower, and with the Reanimator Cryptek support, they are genuinely hard to take out in return. I want to emphasize here that this durability is wacky. It's along its own strange axis, and how enemy lists deal with it is mostly orthogonal to how good they are at in most games. You haven't lived, you've seen a Marine player reroll a billion dice and deliver a bucket load of plasma wounds that are each 12 wounds and AP minus 1,000, and you roll a few dice and you get a little hot and everybody stands back up. They go nuts. It's great. There are ways to deal with these guys. I'm not saying that they're invincible, but some people just don't have those ways, and they're stuck doing 5 wounds at a time that have high AP and lots of damage, and these guys just genuinely don't care, and it's pretty great. The Reanimator is another recent addition. I was seduced by a genuinely cool model, and he stayed because with 3 big units to heal, he's always got something to do. It's noteworthy that he's your 4th unit with something to choose in the command phase, counting the HQ guys as the first 3, so always remind yourself not to jump to movement until you've made all of those choices. I had to write it on my hand for a little while. Usually this guy's going to be healing warriors because of the obvious synergy between his +1 to their check and their rerolling of ones, but occasionally it's worth it to switch him to some Tomb Blades if the warriors are heavily diminished and the blades are basically fresh. The Reanimator dying is far from a tragedy, by the by. He may not be healing the unit anymore, but at least he saved them from whatever finally put him down. The big point drop they got recently is what actually pushed me over the line into playing them. I wouldn't have played them at their old points cost, but at this points cost, he's been doing alright. Here we go. The big guy, the main man. Everybody went wacky over this guy when the Codex came out, and for good reason. He's straight fire. He'll evaporate almost anything he charges, and his Citan powers make the game unbearable for the other player until he's removed. They can't interact with any way with them, and it's just great. I could, and probably will someday, do a whole video on all the proper things about playing as Citan. Like, there's a lot to go over in these pieces. It's a fascinating piece in the common meta. Huge skill floor, huge skill ceiling. You got to put time and practice in to make this guy work for you. In brief, though, don't think of him as having wounds. Think of him as having phases, and always track how many phases he is away from death. You can be a lot bolder in a list if there's no Psychers, for example, than you can against a list that will trivially do 3 in the Psychic phase. The fundamental thing to remember is that everyone can do 3 in the Fight phase, so you bank on the other phases to protect you. A Citan who uses 2 powers a turn, unrestricted at 24 inches for the whole game, will make about 300 points back versus most lists. You end up doing like 32 to 34 wounds. Most units are 10 to 12 points per wound, and there you go. You have to be a little more aggressive with the Nightbringer if you want to make your points back. He does need to charge something, but the powers do get you most of the way there. You want to be gentle, passive with your Citan. Don't just push him down the other player's throat unless you're sure you can get away with it. It's always better to loom, or almost always. A thing people don't think about the Citan is the perfect early game objective holder in most matchups. They can't usually smite anything but the closest, and they can't charge him because he's all the way across the tables. You just stand him on an objective, and a billion points of guns can glare at him, and all they're going to do is 3 damage. It's pretty great. And if they run up any OPSEC units to steal it, he intervenes into them and murks them. I'll cut myself short on this guy because I could talk about him for pretty much till the cows come home. He's your goalie. He's your countercharger. Use the threat of him to keep the enemy honest or punish them if they push him regardless. He kills characters with his times arrow. He reaps valuable models with his charges, and he sprinkles mortal wounds around all over the place like it's going out of style. If the Nightbringer is the superstar of the Codex, then the barges are his roadies. They aren't exciting, they aren't glamorous, they do decent damage, take decent damage to die, and are just generally the most mediocre unit you'll ever see in a competitive list. But sometimes, mediocre is what you need. Their movement plus their range works perfectly in the 9th edition smaller tables. Their guns benefit hugely from the Mephrit Dynasty's traits, and as a vehicle, you don't have to rescue them from CC. You can just let them blaze away inside it after they get locked up. Their natural enemies are the enemy's objective grabbers. They're early game guys, the throwaway units they fling around to engage on all fronts, all that sort of thing. That's who you want to pop with your barges, and they do that job great. And that's who the barges are in danger from. And the barges are quite safe from most throwaway units, like 50 to 100 point guys. Their profile is just outside the ability of the enemy's throwaway units to kill. They're calculated to need the shot callers to take down. You want to use the barges to bait out the good stuff, so your Tomb Blades and Warriors can get the jump on them. The Tomb Blades are, after the Warriors, the most straightforwardly exciting models for me in the Codex. Maybe even the best. Yeah, they might be better than the Warriors. Unclear. Warriors, I think, are better with a veil, but I think Tomb Blades are better without a veil. These things are fast and they shred. You get them in half range and it's just really, really ugly. And in a pinch, you can veil them into half range. But it's pretty much over for whoever. They eat up whole Primaris units on the regular. Anything that isn't annihilated is just barely hanging on. These guys, along with your Warriors, are the guys you're hoping to win the game with. Don't be fooled by the -1 to hit and the multi-wounds. They're not durable. They're not tough. It's a glass cannon, right? If anything is left to fire back, then you're losing these guys. They're protected by distance, line of sight, or they're not protected. AP -3 wounds are all over the places, and people will evaporate these guys in a heartbeat if you let them. Focus on your Tomb Blade play above all else when playing this list. If you get the W, usually these are the guys you have to thank for it. Necron lists nowadays get command protocols as long as they have a noble alive and in charge. So let's take a sec to talk about what we're going to do with those command protocols. Round 1, most of the time, is just about jockeying for position. Both sides have their main units out of sight. Everyone's kind of feeling each other out. I like Eternal Guardians for this round. Keeps my cover saves in case I get sloppy and the enemy manages to draw a line on someone, or they just decide to take a swing at the Annihilation barges that I couldn't fit behind the cover. Round 2 is the money turn. Ideally, this is when your barges and your Nightbringer take the upper hand. You want to get the enemy into a real pickle on round 2. I give them the Vengeful Stars for this round. I think it's more important than having it on the turn that the main units fire, because the main units kind of are enough by themselves. Vengeful Stars is the most important one for our Mephrit Dynasty, so that's the round usually that I think we're taking power. Conquering Tyrants is your last chance to save the game if it's not going your way, so do it on round 3. If your bikes are all locked up and your veil is gone, the Royal Warden can't be everywhere, and Conquering Tyrant gives you a get out of jail. You pull everyone back one last time on this thing and give them the business from close range. And, if your Mephrit list hasn't won after 2 rounds of close range fire, it's not going to win. After that, the order doesn't really matter much. I put the healing one up and then the movement one, but you could probably swip those around or put the fighting one in if you're feeling it. I don't think most games exciting things are happening after turn 3. I do switch this up sometimes. If there's a blitz list and the enemy is absolutely going to be running down your throat and you expect to get locked up everywhere on bottom 1, I'll switch 2 and 3. It's a lot more important if you need Conquering Tyrant to have it than it is to have the extra AP and ignore cover from Vengeful Stars. So be careful about those first 2 orders. Other than that, though, I think the later ones don't really matter all that much. Alright, so you've got a pretty good idea of all the components of the list by now. Let's talk about what it all adds up to. Like, what are we building towards here? First off, this is a 9th edition list. It plays into all the strengths that the edition demands. We're maximizing mobility and firepower in a meta that is shrinking the table and using objectives to demand that the players spread out. That's just good stuff. I know there are a lot of dinosaur lists out there, gun lines trying to pick up wins with 1 or 2 mobile units to race for the objectives at the end, and that guy everybody knows is still running 8 squads of 8 corn guys. This is not a dinosaur list. This is a meteor list. You pick those guys up, no trouble. Next off, in the modern all-marine all-the-time meta, we do have some weirdo edge. Like, the Satan is a genuinely strange piece. A lot of people aren't quite sure how to handle it, especially if they don't have a competent player in their meta, and you can take those folks by surprise. Even if they don't goof up against it, that's still like cycles of their thought process that have to go into dealing with this model with the Necrodermis that, they're not spending on thinking about the more important, like, who's standing and what objective stuff. Also, because we are like a recent codex, we're generally a bit of a spring period here. Like our blades and warriors are genuinely one of the more threatening things on many tabletops. We may not quite be, marine reroll nonsense, but we're the next best thing, and a lot of really armies aren't cut out for a list that can just throw out 200 shots in a single turn. In a tourney, it can be just as important how you lose as how much you lose. We pass that test. We have the mobility to extract all of the points available when we're going to win, and we're kind of threatening and spiky. So when we lose, it tends to be in the later rounds after some like cautious fencing. So we tend to lose fairly high too. And lastly, just like any Marine player is being honest with himself has to give props to Oath, we have to give props to Purge Vermin. Quite possibly the best secondary in the game at this time. It's going to help you out in any kind of game you see fit to play it in. All right, so what's on the other side of the coin, right? What are the things that give this close range Mephrit shooting list trouble? We are, and probably always will be, a one faction codex. Sorry, a one codex faction. This means that although Marines and Necrons both got their decks at the same time, they're going to be getting constant books that make them more powerful faster than we will, because they have the rest of the Imperium having their back. Chaos gets their Demon releases and their CSM releases. Eldar have 3 flavors. Necrons are going to be living with this book for a long time, so get comfy, right? In our whole list, you won't see a single reroll. It's just not a thing we do. That's the ceiling, right? Space Marines can trivially get rerolls. I play a game. I'll watch a Space Marine player reroll, and I'll be like, "Hey, why'd you reroll?" And just try and guess what it is. And honestly, it's genuinely tough. Competitive Necron lists have to always sort of ice skate uphill in that front. If we roll a bunch of ones, then we just miss a bunch of shots, right? Empyrean dominance of the tournament scene isn't going away. You will always be fighting that nonsense, right? You'll always be facing a guy who is chasing his 9th edition decks with all the best parts of their 8th edition chapter specific decks and just got some nonsense from a Crusade decks, and maybe he has like a Battlefront decks, and he's gonna have a backpack of books, right? You're always going to lose in a fair fight. You have to get the jump on them every game, because if you stand and trade with the Imperium, it's just going to be your dice rolls versus their dice rolls and rerolls, and you're going to get worked. We also just relinquish the psychic phase entirely, so we're helpless in the psychic phase. I didn't want to take Caesaricon models or any Canoptic stuff with a Gloom Prism, so we just eat those mortal wounds. Protocols don't work against them. Thousand Suns, Eldar, Grey Knights, they all just do their dance without any interference from us. Next up, going way back, there was a cool concept that some lists pose questions and others answer them. We're an answer them list. The very best 40k lists have always been the ones that pose their questions, right? You had to specifically build against them to have a chance. You remember these, like Lash Chaos, Leaf Blower, all the different flavors of Flyer Spam, Flying Hive Tyrant stuff. Anything that if you didn't build against it, you just got worked by it. The very best list posed a question like, how do you deal with this nonsense? And if someone didn't have an answer, they just got slaughtered. Our list very much isn't that. People can beat us without knowing anything about us when they walk up to the table. We're a very conventional kind of list. We're some highly mobile, hard shooting dudes. We want to jump between cover and purge enemies from table quarters, but fundamentally, we're all over the tourney. Almost every table is going to have people a lot like us, just Marines. Same spirit. We aren't a spam list, and that's not a compliment. In my lexicon, spam list is a compliment. So not being one is a bad thing. A winning strategy in 40k has always been to overload one aspect of the opponent's firepower profile. Like you take so many vehicles that they don't have enough meltas, or you take so many orc hordes, you have more bodies than they have bullets. We're not that kind of thing. We're a list that has a weakness to volume of fire multi-wound models, which is what everyone is struggling to fit in their list, right? Like our worst enemy is autocannons and heavy bolters, and guess what everyone's trying to find as many of as they possibly can, right? In summary, the weakness is between chair and table, right? Like if I make a play mistake, the list can't bail me out. I'm just going to get murked. Models that get shot get picked up, and I have to keep everything flowing fine, or I just lose the game. All that being said, how does the list play on the tabletop? Like, what is this all adding up to? How do you pilot this list? Our plan goes something like this. We try and build a board with a lot of blocking terrain because our speed and our veil lets us maneuver in it better than most people. At all costs, we hide our worker units, which is our tomb blades and our warriors. The enemy is doing likewise with their best units. In the early phase of the game, both sides are still being bashful with their heavy hitters. We try and win the early game with our Nightbringer and our Annihilation barges, sometimes with the characters helping with shooting support, because we have some hard shooting characters. This is the most critical part of the game. If this works out, the opponent is facing a dire predicament. As the second and third rounds come around, their core may be safe, but they're losing board control, and we're starting to win on a primary, and we're starting to box them in. And so they're going to have to hope that they can push out with their main units and reverse things. But our main units are still hiding. So out come their Hellblasters and their Plasma guys and everything, and they bring their workhorse out and obliterate our barges, you know. And when that happens, we bring our warriors and blades out, we counterpunch, and we get the win. Or, you know, we get so much attrition that the game goes unilaterally our way. The enemy may try and lock us up in clinch. We got plenty of tricks to get around that, get the guns free, and hopefully we're in command from the 5th round onward. That's the goal. So that was great general stuff, but let's talk about how we actually get the points while the above is going on, right? First off, for the primary, the stuff I told you about is basically going to cover it. Like, we try and use our barges and our Nightbringer to shove them off the objectives at first, and they hopefully have to use their big stuff to come out and compensate for that. Then we get the first strike on their big stuff with our warriors and our blades, and we win the attrition. All right. Worth noting, but I've been kind of referring to the warriors and the tomb blades interchangeably. But if there's a choice, you want the warriors who are OBSEC to be on the main center objective, and they're also just much more durable. So slapping them down the enemy's face is much safer than it is to do the same with the tomb blades. You want them to focus more on warriors than on tomb blades if you can, you know, make any choice, especially if they've lost their veil, because they can run away from the warriors after that point, and they can't really run from the tomb blades unless they're, you know, aircraft or something. The Nightbringer is sort of the peanut butter in this peanut butter and jelly sandwich here. He's your troubleshooter and your firefighter. If he times arrows a particularly good character, or, you know, just charges and splats without retribution an enemy unit, it's practically a lock. They're coming out of the box to get him. Like, people's early game stuff has trouble with the Satan. They can't shift it, and sometimes the Satan tilts people. He's a big part. Like, him and the barges together make up the early game push, but you should try and keep him around so that later on in the game he's still there to help make sure people don't lock up all your tomb blades. All right, so talking about secondaries then. I'm not going to try and make like some artificial suspense. The first one I'm going to talk about, and the first one you should always take, is Purge Vermin. It's, in my opinion, the best secondary in the game, and there's no reason in the world not to let it do work for us. It synergizes perfectly with our plan, which is, you know, this cautious attrition thing, and it gives us points for doing what we want to do anyway, which is killing the enemy and getting away from our objectives. Purge really goes well with grind. It goes well with oath of that bad guys having oath or engage. So keep that in mind. Like, Purge is meta, it's right, it gets easier as the game goes on. Like, in defeat, you'll get 8 to 10, in victory, you'll get the full 15. There's not enough words to praise Purge. You just take Purge, then start thinking about secondaries. For my second secondary, I almost always select a kill strat of some kind, which is to say a strat that you get for killing enemy models. Assassinate, the psychic one that's just assassinate but better. Bring it down if they got a lot of vehicles and monsters, you name it. The one point is that I want to get points for killing enemy models. Don't get caught up in getting to 15 here. You're not like trying to win the game on all this thing. Eyes on the prize, and the prize is the primary. You want to be able to work at your primary without needing to think about your secondaries. Your kill strat, you want to get 9 or more in the games that you win. Grind them down is my default. If the bad guys aren't packing a list that just sings out for one of the others, grind is going to work about half the time. If you're winning, you figure it'll work 3 times and fail twice. But, you know, if their list is got a billion models in it, take that one that you get like a point for every 10 guys you kill. If they're Titans, take Titan Slayers. But, you know, like, take the right kill strat, but take a kill strat, so you don't have to think about a strat during the game. For the last one, I leave the matter in the capable hands of our immortals, our dedicated action buddies. Banners, scramblers, whatever. Put them in strategic reserve if you have to. Always check out the mission-specific strat, because sometimes that's the right call. But the key is, once again, you want points without changing what your main units are doing. You want 1,800 points of your list working on the primary, and you can purge vermin and your kill strat, and then just these little immortal units doing this other thing. Most important, and more important than how many you get on this, is how sure you are of getting the points. The ones that like max out at 10, they're perfectly fine here. It's got to be something that the chumps can take care of. You don't want them needing help from your warriors. All right. Importantly, since this is a 5 wound immortal squad we're talking about, don't choose one of the strats that's like, it begins at the end of your movement phase and it ends the next turn in your command phase, and they have to live through a whole round of the enemy because, their name is a joke, right? We have no faith in the immortals' durability. Plant a banner if you have to, do scramblers or whatever, but don't take one of those like ones where you have to live there for a whole turn channeling the strat, because people can kill immortals without trying real hard. All right, let's talk about what I do and do not want to see in enemy lists. In other words, matchups. All right, so what we most want to see in an enemy list is immobility. Slow units, units with heavy weapons, that kind of thing. Big based vehicles without fly, you get hung up on terrain, are always funny. Our ideal prey is anyone against whom we can use line of sight blocking terrain to only engage parts of their list at once. Chop them up to bits, leaving the rest helplessly sort of glaring at the walls that we're all sticking behind. Next up on our hit parade is all the people whose game plan is totally ruined by the Nightbringer. Lists that plan on leading the way with one lone, incredibly durable unit that the Nightbringer can one round are great. Like, if they hang back with their Chaos Primarch or whatever, that's a win for us. And if they lead with it and the Nightbringer splats it, then obviously that's great too. A third list archetype that we love to see is people who are like, I'm going to win without killing. I've just got all these OPSEC models. They're going to be everywhere. And, we shoot 200 times. We will absolutely get rid of people who are just swarms of OPSEC. That's not a problem for us. We love to see that sort of thing. Beyond that, and kind of sharing something with the Satan allergic list earlier, but specifically to call it out, our list has immense mobility, so we're always delighted to see an enemy that needs to be close to us, like foot terminators, lich guard equivalents, that sort of thing. Like between the Nightbringer being his goalie self and the Veil snatching their prey unit away and the blades just being really fast, we can do the hit and run game pretty well. There's no denying also that our unit has like a type, if you will. We put out lots and lots of low quality wounds, trying to force an enemy to roll lots of dice and ultimately go under. That being the case, we always love to see people who are prepared for just the opposites. To us, a dread that takes 1 less damage from all successful attacks and has a 4-up invul save is pretty much identical to any other vehicle, right? It's always a great news that the other player has spent a lot of points on those kind of defenses that we just totally bypass. The flip side, of course, is that there are matchups that are the worst, the ones where we're going to struggle. Every once in a while, you run across someone who's like, well, I ignore all AP -1, and my armor is 1 better against 1 damage attacks, or something, like that. Whole factions have rules that just utterly stuffs us, and it's always just a really rough game, especially because those rules aren't typically like the focus of their list. They have something else going on, but just casually, all our best stuff doesn't work on them. Psychic powers, of course, are a kick in the teeth. You might feel like your warriors, backed up by a reanimator in cover, are safe as houses, and a pair of farseers will poke their faces out and roll a few dice, and you get, smite, executioner, and you're like, great, half the squad's dead. I didn't in any way interact with that. In the same way, it stands to reason that if we can annihilate enemies whose defenses don't do well versus lots of power attacks, the reverse is true. Taking down a high toughness, heavy armor vehicle can be pure pain. If their list is spamming them, like, look at all these tanks, so many tanks, you can be a situation where you're just like, I don't have enough gun, I'm not capable of dealing with all these monoliths. You can be in a situation where even if you roll well, it's just not a thing. Broadly, we fit into the category of a horde list. It's not a perfect fit, but we have a 19-man unit and we have a pair of bike squads that each have 18 wounds. So if the other guy's tooled up to hunt hordes, if he's ready to fight waves of gaunts and orcs, then that's obviously tougher for us than if he's waving around meltas. And the last thing, and this is a bit of a cop-out, but obviously character removal is as annoying for us as anyone else, in particular if it gets to the Satan. If they have targeted smites and snipers, that can be a problem, especially if they pop the Technomancer before he fails. Then we have to rely on the 50-50 strat that stands him up. If they engage everyone while simultaneously removing the Royal Warden, that's a pill. Character removal can throw sand in our gears, so you got to always watch out for that. I'll close out this video with a brief talk about what alterations I've considered for the list. It's not perfected by any means. I'm always mixing and matching stuff constantly. So this is some things I'm working on. All right, so the most obvious thing to note is that I have I've sung the praises of Tomb Blades and Warriors a lot in this video, and there's room to have a lot more of those in the list. If I shrank the Nightbringer to a Transcendent Satan and got rid of the Reanimator, you can get another Tomb Blade unit, which would really increase the old firepower. It would also stretch our deployment zone hiding place real estate a bit, but some tables it would work great. Similarly, I could fire a squad of Immortals, which I would do with immense pleasure, and get a second big unit of Warriors. I'd have to remove some other support staff, of course, but in any game where you don't need the Veil for the Warriors, that would be an improvement, especially one where the enemy was coming to me. I could also stand to have a lot less characters, honestly. If I drop the barge down to a dirt cheap noble like an overlord or a lord and fire one of the support characters, I'm halfway to the third blades. Then the Nightbringer downgrade goes to rest, and I'd have that third command squad. Third Tomb Blade squad. I'd obviously miss the command barge, but maybe I only think that because I haven't tried it, and I wouldn't miss it at all once I had a third Tomb Blade squad. I've also got an extra slot that's currently going unused in the Technomancer. They can each have Arcana, and mine doesn't have any. Any or all of these changes could go along with buying him the Hypermaterial Ablator, which would be interesting for him. That would let him hand out cover every turn to, say, the Warrior unit. Would be interesting. The change I've made most recently and been toying around with is to downgrade the Nightbringer to the Void Dragon and inflate one of the Annihilation Barges to a Ghost Arc. It doesn't shoot as hard then, but it's 6 extra wounds, and if it's just being traded in the first place anyway, that just makes it more likely to force them to use their real units, right? Inconclusive to the success here so far, but it has let me play with my cool Void Dragon model, which was probably the real point of it. And that's about it for the Mephrit short-range shooting list. If you're a Necron player, I urge you to give it a try. If you're not, I urge you to become a Necron player. It's a fun list to play, and you should do at least average in most metas. Thanks for listening.